This is the Stadium B hover. It's the second OoB in Palace Ruins if you include it in the route, and it looks a little something like this. It's a pretty complicated little maneuver, I'm not going to lie. It's probably one of the more tricky hovers in the any percent and hero mode route, but it's definitely doable. I've spent a lot of time with this trick, and I feel like I understand it pretty well. And I feel like if there's anybody who really has a good opinion on how best to achieve this trick, it would be myself. So the first thing that we're going to do is I want to show you the trigger that we have to hit with the camera. It is a camera-based trigger. Let me pull up my video. These first two triggers are nothing too special. I mean, you have to hit them. When we bounce over the wall, that small yellow trigger just in front of us is what we have to hit. This small thing right here. I'll continue to show some angles here. This is what it looks like. It doesn't really stick up that far, and it doesn't really stick out that wide. In the tunnel, you can't miss it. Going over the tunnel, however, is a different story. All we have to do in order to load the next region of Palace Ruins, which is called Stadium B, according to the debug menu here. When our camera hits the yellow trigger and we pass through, you'll see Stadium will load in once I pass down here. And then if we come back, there is a small invisible barrier that I have to cross over. But if your camera hits the other side of this trigger, the red side, Stadium B will once again deload. You'll see things pop out of existence just like that. So, coming back here, we have to hit this trigger while hovering at the angle that Jack is facing right now. It is a very slim target. So let's go over how we can go about achieving that. So typically, whenever I'm lining this hover up, I have a very particular place that I am aiming myself at towards the wall. I'm approaching the wall always like this. This very, I don't really know exactly what you would call this, maybe like a 45-degree angle, a little more shallow. I'm not flush with the wall. I'm not completely perpendicular to the wall. I'm coming at it kind of at an in-between zone here. I guess that would roughly be 45 degrees. You're not going to get out a protractor and measure this. Just try to copy the angle that I'm using here in this instance, right? Go ahead and show you again. Typically, I try to land on this tile. I'm going to punch board off. For any percent, I try to grab these ammo boxes because I need them for final boss in order to help manipulate the nuke ammo drops. Otherwise, you have very little red ammo typically going into final boss. So I try to grab these anytime I can. Of course, for hero mode, that's optional. I'll make sure I have 2 side flip speed, and I start lining myself up for my visual. I did make a handy little image here that highlights exactly what I'm aiming at, so you get a good idea. So the lineup is this highlighted portion right here. It's not highlighted too in depth so you can see like the texture behind it. I'm aiming right in this area, probably more so towards the upper part of the region than the lower parts of the region. You really don't want to go too much further to the left or too much further to the right, otherwise you're going to make this trick almost impossible to beat, or almost impossible to complete, I'm sorry. The trick to this is using your movement to manipulate the camera as much as possible in order for it to pass through this incredibly thin trigger while you're hovering at an angle that's almost completely parallel to the trigger, right? So I find that aiming right about here tends to be what gives me the most success. Going back to my video example here, I'll go ahead and slow us down so that we can talk about this play-by-play. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start a hover. I prefer to use a spin hover because I can use the side flip to maintain my momentum. That is optional, but it's optimal. You can see I kind of hit the top end of this here. I'm a little outside of where my yellow barrier would have been defined on my image, but as long as you're left of this pole and not too far left of this little corner right here, whatever you want to call it, you should be fine. What you really want to have happen, no matter what angle you take, is you want Jack to, when he bounces, fly almost directly over where these two textures meet. These two textures here, I mean, this is a little deceiving because of depth perception. This arch kind of comes out. So this part of the wall is technically behind where it looks like it meets here, but right at this V shape is where I'm trying to send Jack through. You can actually come out a little further to the right than I do right here. I wish I had a clip handy. I don't think that I do, unfortunately. I tried to find one because you can hit it where you're further to the right. Actually, I do think I have one, yeah, but it's not much further to the right. Let me get this other one here. So you can see this is in my 90% run. I'm going directly over the V. If I show you this one, I'm a little to the right of it, but you can see, like, to me, this is a world of difference. It's rather precise. You can be a little further to the right, but you really don't want to be much further than that. So what I'm going to do now is watch the input display down here, if you can see it for the YouTube handles, or the YouTube controls. What we're looking at is right as the camera starts to slide up this arch, is I'm going to start moving my control stick for the camera left right now, right as it's about to start sliding. And I'm going to hold left for the entire trick. Okay. So what's going on again during this segment, I'm going to aim my hover and I'm going to start. I'm going to 2-finger mash. That's something I should have mentioned before. I'm sorry. Is you're going to want to mash fast enough that you're going to clear this arch long before you ever get to it. You see how I have considerable height over the archway? You really don't want to just barely be clearing it. You want a good amount of space. I don't really know how to describe the space other than just kind of what you can see here visually. But you really want to put most of your mash kind of top heavy. That's why I hover so high at this part, so that by the time I get over here, I'm not having to 2-finger mash anymore, because I'm bringing my hand over for a claw grip, right? So instead of having 2 index fingers on the L1 button to mash, I bring my hand over and I start tilting the camera in with my thumb, as one would expect. So I've got a claw grip going on, because what happens immediately after is once I make it over the arch and the camera catches up to me like this, it might bob around a little bit, and that's fine. But once it catches up to you, you want to start free falling. Let's look at that again, because that's important. The free fall is so critical. I cannot emphasize enough how critical it is to free fall in the way that I tell you, because it manipulates the camera. So we get up here, as the camera catches up to Jack, we're going to start free falling, and I'm going to try to fall alongside the tunnel. Let me try to emphasize that again. We want to fall parallel to or alongside the tunnel. You're going to see here, instead of aiming for where I'm wanting to land at here in a second, I point in pretty hard towards the tunnel before I start turning out rather late. And that's to be sure that the camera gets pulled through this trigger, right? So you can think of it, I'm taking Jack. You'll just have to pretend my cursor is Jack. So I'm hovering, whip, 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 over to about here. And then when I free fall kind of over and through the trigger while I'm panning my camera to the left. And once I do that, ideally, I should get the load, right? So I have side flip speed again. So I just do another hover to kind of turn out, and then I do movement to finish out Palace Ruins. Getting the load is the hardest part. So again, once you get up and over this archway, see how I'm already holding left on the camera stick? Once I'm to this point, as the camera, I kind of almost think of it as making the camera slide up this arch. When the camera is about to hit the arch, I start pressing the camera in so it will slide up and follow Jack. And once it catches up to Jack, I start free falling, and I slowly drift down after I fall along the tunnel, and I time my turn so that I can catch the very end of that platform. Okay. Another thing, back here when I mentioned the height being important, there are some solid structures along the outside of the tunnel. Let's see if I can kind of get a better view of them. These, I don't know what you would call them, fins, I guess? Let's get rid of the screen tearing. These little fins outside of the tunnel are solid. So you have to be careful to avoid those, and you want to be high up enough that you also avoid hitting the top of this collision, because I'm pretty sure this is solid from the top. And a lot of this turns out to be solid, so you just have to be really careful. The fins, the top of this little archway looking thing here, which you don't see any of this, but you can bump into it and you'll become very intimate with it as you repeat this 10,000 times to get it once. But it's so critical, the free falling component of this, where you get this high once the camera catches up and then you start free falling to pull the camera. You see where the camera is at in relation to the tunnel? And how, as I'm free falling, it's pulling the camera through where that trigger would be. And then I turn out, and then I hover, and I get to the end. You'll see these little pieces of debris here outside of the platform. These give you an indicator that you did get the load. If these little pieces of debris aren't here, it's just going to be void space and you'll fall and die, which is sad. I have another clip here, is the one I did the other night in a run. Well, that didn't work. And we'll see from my angle here, we're going to wait for the camera to slide up, or we're going to, as the camera hits the arch, I'm going to slide it, the camera to the left, right? So it will slide up this little structure. You'll have to forgive me tripping over my words, I apologize. So as the camera hits the arch, I turn, so it slides up. Once it catches up, I start free falling, and I fall towards the tunnel. A lot of this you kind of just have to get a good sense for, but you can see it on my control stick if the YouTube controls will get out of the way. Once I free fall, I aim towards the tunnel and keep falling diagonally until the timing mentally is right and I can turn out. You see there how the little debris I talked about popped into existence? Here you have yet to see it, but as I continue to fall, they pop in. Right here, they're not here. And then at this point, the camera passes through part of the trigger and then the next area loads. Just like so. And I hate to say, yeah, that's all there is to it, because it is incredibly complicated. It's not easy. It's tricky, and it took me a lot of practice and a lot of experimentation to really figure out. But it's definitely doable, and it can be consistent so long as you put in the time and the effort and you really try to understand like how all this movement works together to manipulate the camera. So here we go at full speed again. I'm going to get my 2 side flips. I'm going to do my quick mash for my hover so I have plenty of height. Turn the camera, free fall towards the tunnel, turn out, and hover. You can also land on the guardrails that are down below that you can grind on, but I'm not going to go through all that. That's just a movement option you can figure out for yourself. I don't personally do it because I use the spinning hover to kind of help out with keeping my momentum. So I'll show you this other example as well, just so you can see kind of what I'm going for. 2 side flips. Make sure you mash plenty, get over, and just like so. Again, it's hard, but it really all comes down to making sure your movement is pulling the camera parallel to the tunnel while you're tilting the camera inwards, turning it to the left, so that it will pass through that trigger as Jack is free falling alongside the tunnel. And of course, I'm always happy to try to help anybody learn this trick. It's been one of my favorites as I've been working on it lately. It's a lot of fun once you start getting it consistently. Thank you for watching.